Fracture by Braylee Parkinson. Clem Robertson stuck the iPod in the back pocket of her faded jeans. The minute first-generation device blasted Tom Petty, singing about an American girl. She crooned at the top of her lungs, swinging her arms and rocking her hips from side to side before sweeping her golden gray-streaked hair up to the crown of her head. She pulled the strands into a bun and let out a short, forceful whistle. The two dogs, a border collie and a German shepherd, Bennett and Milo, raised their heads. She grabbed a travel mug, filled it with coffee, and snapped on the top. She looked at the waiting dogs. "Come on if you're coming," she said, as she slipped her subcompact Glock 9mm and a few personal protection rounds into the holster around her waist. On her way out, she snagged a bath towel and pushed the door of the old Airstream trailer open. The dogs rushed after her, jumping out of the trailer and running ahead. The sun was already beating down on the desert near Lund, Utah. Clem had called this vast, isolated landscape home for 5 years, and she'd never been happier. This area was much more suitable for her than the previous place she'd camped. The fewer eyes, the better. It only took one noisy tourist, or a kid, recording her location with their cell phone and uploading it to the stupid internet, to ruin her life. That was why she was several miles outside of Lund. People drove through the ghost town and rummaged through the ruins regularly. Clem made sure she was far enough away that the casual explorer wouldn't find her. But Clem was aware she had a charmed life. Her days began when she woke up. There wasn't an alarm clock or a job waiting for her, and no one nagging her about cooking breakfast or anything else. She fed Bennett and Milo on her schedule, made her coffee, and settled into the day. If she wanted to run a few miles, she did that. If she wanted to spend a lazy day sitting out front of her camper, she was free to do so. As far as necessities went, hunting in the fall always kept the freezer full. Of course, she didn't bother with the government's ridiculous hunting licenses. It was the one time during the year Clem would put on makeup and curl her hair. She had yet to run into a wildlife division official who wanted to check her credentials. She'd turn on the charm and keep the conversation going until the official moved on. Implementing a strict carnivore diet had made it easy to live off the grid and in the desert, because it eliminated all grocery store trips. She drank water, had coffee shipped to a P.O. box, and ate wild game. That day Clem made her way to the hot springs near the spot she'd temporarily claimed 5 years ago. There had once been hot springs all throughout the area, but most had dried up because of an extended drought. She'd stumbled upon a few hot pots near a geothermal factory one day when she was out running. She couldn't bathe there because it was too hot, but she would gather water in her jug and let it cool for a while. After that, Clem would strip off her clothes and pour the water over her body. She loved how free she felt, shedding her clothes and living life on her terms. Most days she was completely alone, and she loved it. The geothermal plant was out in the distance, and there were a few pig farms a couple of miles south, but the desert had turned out to be the perfect place to hide. Other stragglers that roamed around Lund knew her as Priscilla. She told an overly friendly waitress at a diner in Cedar City that was her name. Priscilla had rolled off her tongue. She'd been listening to Elvis all day long, so Priscilla was the first name to come to mind. There were, of course, some people who were curious about who she was. Now and then, rockhounds searching for geodes or someone retracing the Pony Express route stumbled upon her little piece of heaven. She was friendly to a point, but kept the 9mm close, just in case someone got too nosy. So far, no one had required her to deal with them. Clem's removal from modern society, and all its inhabitants, was working out just fine. She explored the desert during the day, stargazed at night, read the few books she'd shuffled into the RV before setting her foreclosed home on fire, and lived a peaceful life with her dogs. Leaving the world behind had been easy for Clem. She'd seen the writing on the wall with the signing of the Patriot Act. Clem and her husband had both been working at a military base, and they saw firsthand what was coming down the pipeline. That was when she started downsizing and rolling back the hands of time. She sold her 2007 Jeep Cherokee and purchased a 1949 Jeep Willys. She disconnected the internet, destroyed her cell phone, and tried to convince her husband Harry that time was running thin. They needed to move fast. Something's going down soon. I can feel it. We should start thinking about moving off-grid. We could settle in the desert and become self-sufficient. That might be the only way to avoid the worst of it. Clem, we have a life here. What are you talking about? Stop listening to those conspiracy theorists, Harry said. After a few years of fighting about whether the government was systematically stripping them and everyone else in the country of their fundamental rights, Clem had come home from a local militia meeting to find a note on the kitchen table. Clem, this isn't what I signed up for. I don't want a divorce, but I need some time away. When you are ready to talk, please call me, or use a carrier pigeon, or whatever means you deem appropriate for communication since you destroyed your cell phone. We can start taking trips to the desert and spend time there, but we live in a house in Tooele and we love it. Our kids and friends live close, and frankly, I don't see why you can't recognize all our blessings. I am willing to reconcile, but a few things have to happen. First, try to get your old job at the base back. It's far-fetched, but I think I can pull some strings. Next, you absolutely must stop listening to that whack job guy who was talking about chemicals in the water changing the sex of frogs, and you need to drop out of that weird militia you're a part of. You know that puts my job at the base at risk. I can't have a wife who is delusional about what's happening with the government. I have the number of a good psychiatrist, and if you need some time somewhere quiet to think, we can arrange that. I love and miss my wife. Please come back. Clem had read the letter once, turned on a stove burner, waited until the coil was red hot, and dropped the paper onto the glowing element. The charred paper floated onto the kitchen floor. Clem watched for a moment, but quickly switched her thoughts to her next move. A few suitcases filled with clothes, guns, and books were sitting in her bedroom closet. She rushed upstairs, grabbed her belongings, and threw them into the old Ford F-250 they used to pull the Airstream. Working quickly, she climbed into the truck, backed it close to the trailer, and latched it to the hitch. She hated double towing, but she needed the Jeep Willys too. After she got the Jeep and trailer situated, she grabbed a gas can from the garage and doused the kitchen with gasoline. It was necessary. After she left, Harry would probably call the police and report her missing. They'd look for clues about where she'd gone. Harry would immediately assume she'd gone to Overton, Nevada, where her sister lived, but no one, not even her sister, understood what was coming. Everyone thought she was crazy. She wasn't sure she could trust anyone, even the militia members. She'd get in touch with them if she needed anything, but right now, she just needed to move. Clem grabbed the rest of the notepad and lit it on fire from the stove. Then she tossed it onto the floor and watched the flame spread in a square. I really poured the gasoline in straight lines. Good job, she thought, heading out the door. Now 7 years on, Clem was sure no one was looking for her. After a few months in the West Desert, she'd realized she needed to be somewhere more secluded. That prompted her to torch the F-250, get an old 1970s Ford F-150, and pull the Airstream and Willys into the desert near Lund, Utah. A few years back, she'd gotten a few puppies from a man named Jack, who raised dogs while squatting in various properties left over from windswept ghost towns. Now and then, when she felt lonely, she'd drive 50 miles to his place and they'd spend a few nights together. He was at least 15 years her junior, but they'd never discussed age or anything else personal. Jack was what she called him, but it probably wasn't his name. Clem didn't care. He was accessible when she wanted to be bothered, and not around when she didn't feel like company, the ideal relationship in her eyes. As Clem reflected on her current state of being, a smile spread across her face. Life was good. Clem's thoughts returned to the present as she took in the bright blue morning sky. The quiet beauty of the desert captivated her as she trudged through sandy mounds. Walking through the soft soil was difficult, but Clem was proud she was in good enough shape to push forward without much trouble. It would take about 45 minutes for the water from the hot springs to get to a temperature of her liking. While she waited, she'd rockhound, play with the dogs, or search for items left behind by reckless explorers. She'd found money, just change, but it all mattered, articles of clothing she'd rehabbed, furniture and books. It was surprising to see some of the things people called junk. The dogs, who had been trained well enough not to run after the wild horses anymore, would lie at the end of the hot pot waiting for her to finish her bath. But on this day, Milo took off just as the hot pots came into sight. "Milo! Get back here," she yelled, using the sternest voice she had. Milo was hard to control at times. He was only a year old. Bennett, who was 5, tried to teach him how to behave, but the dog had a mind of his own. "What's gotten into him?" she asked Bennett, but as if on cue, he ran off behind Milo, disappearing into the desert. Stunned, Clem ran back to her camp, jumped in the Jeep Willys, and took off in the direction the dogs had run. She couldn't see them, but she heard the cacophony of barks in the distance. "No treats for you two tonight," she muttered to herself, pushing the Jeep over the sand. After a few minutes, she saw the dogs at the edge of a ravine, both barking viciously. "Quit your barking," she yelled as she parked. Clem was about to get out and round up the dogs when something stopped her. She froze and waited to make sure she was correct. Yes. That was the smell of decomposition. The only question now was if it was an animal or something else. She took a few more steps and spotted a filthy rag of a dress with floral patterns, ripped and blowing in the breeze. The emaciated body and needle-thin arms stretched out above the body, as if the person had lifted their arms in surrender before being killed. Clem moved closer, her heart beating wildly. Milo approached behind her. "Get back," she yelled at the dog, holding up her hand to let the dogs know she meant business. 2 more steps forward, and she could see the eyes were wide with what could only be described as primal fear. The mouth, drawn and gaping open, caused Clem to yelp as if in pain. This person had suffered. Something terrible had happened. An object, shiny and broken, caught her eye. She wasn't sure what it was, a necklace maybe, but it looked like it might be worth some money. She inched closer, debating whether or not she should take the glistening piece of jewelry. If she took it to a pawn shop in Nevada, she could probably get a decent amount for it. Clem stepped down into the ravine, held her breath, swiped up the broken pieces of the object, and rushed back towards the dogs. Chapter 2. I don't know if I'm in the right place. Okay. Are you looking for Sylvia Wilcox, the private investigator? Yes. Nice to meet you. I held out my hand. The woman crinkled her nose and forehead before shrugging her shoulders and saying, "I guess I'm in the right place." Her voice betrayed anxiety and fear. I smiled to ease the tension, but my friendliness seemed to increase her level of discomfort. "What brings you in today?" She sighed and folded her arms tightly over her chest. I'm sorry. I've never done this before, and I'm just so nervous." I flashed a smile and nodded my head. "That's normal. No worries. I will help you. Please have a seat," I said, motioning toward the red plush chair in front of my desk. I grabbed a notepad and pen and sat across from the woman, ready to hear her story. "Your name? What type of experience do you have?" I sat the notepad down and suppressed the anger I felt rising from the bottom of my soul. You walked into my office, I thought. But I kept that to myself, and went through a familiar spiel of my credentials. I have a BS in Criminal Justice from the University of Detroit Mercy, an MS from EMU, and 5 years on the Detroit Police Department. I've owned this agency for 5 years. Your name? I asked, hoping my voice was stern enough to produce a response. Sounds impressive, the woman said, but she didn't seem moved. I'm Raina Whitby. Nice to meet you, Raina. How may I help you? I asked. She cast a suspicious look in my direction. We sat in silence for a few minutes. I decided to wait her out. I don't mean to be this way, the woman said before dropping her face into her hands. I pulled out a box of Kleenex and pushed it across the desk. She raised her head and pulled the box of tissue onto her lap. Take your time, I said. Thank you for your kindness. I nodded, counted to 10 in my head and said, let's start from the beginning. The woman looked up, mascara running down her pale cheeks. What brings you in today, Ms. Whitby? I remember reading about you. Those killings of the students a few years back. She'd done her homework, but still was skeptical. Also, she was avoiding telling me why she'd come to my office. I guess I imagined you'd look different. I considered asking what she'd thought I'd look like, but decided against it. Even though Ypsilanti is a diverse community, there are times when my brown skin shocks some. I brushed it off and said, I don't share pictures on my website or allow photos to be posted in the newspaper. Why not? The woman asked, her voice laced with suspicion. Anonymity is a detective's best friend. She took a moment to think about that sentence. Perhaps she arrived at the question that drove that decision. What good is a private investigator if their face is easily identifiable? Ready to get down to business or move on? I asked. Do you need a private investigator, Ms. Whitby? Yes. My daughter-in-law is missing. How long has she been gone? Too long. She left with her cousin Bethany, who was found dead in Utah a few weeks ago. Raina yanked tissues out of the box and sobbed. I knew I should have gone. I should have just taken it upon myself to run to the store. Raina Whitby dabbed her left eye with her index finger. You couldn't have known that this was going to happen, I responded, feeling a bit uncomfortable and wishing that she would tell me the rest of the story. Utah was not in Michigan, so I might need to refer her to someone there, but I didn't have enough information yet to make that determination. I just didn't think anything of it. It was a regular day, you know. Nothing special. I couldn't have known what was happening. People often do surprising things. Right? I had no idea she was going to. Her eyes slid away from my face. She suddenly looked exhausted, her body sagging in the chair. It was a familiar look. She felt guilty for something she had no control over. I needed to be gentle. You can't read minds. It sounds like there was a plan in place. You couldn't have known that. She seemed to perk up a little, leaning back in the chair and setting the box of tissues back on the desk. I thought she was ready to get down to business, so I picked up the pen and notepad and waited. This building is something. I've always wondered what businesses were in here. It used to be apartments when I was younger. Did you know that? I made a show of tossing the notepad onto the desk, instantly regretting how passive-aggressive I was being. Relax, I told myself. Yes. There are still 3 apartments upstairs. I've heard that before. I know that things have to change, but wouldn't it be nice if we could have some elements of life that never changed? I nodded and considered how to move forward. It was usually hard to get clients to explain what they needed, but this was abnormal. Raina rambled on about the building's architecture before finally saying, My daughter-in-law has been missing for 6 months. I want to know if you can find her. Tell me everything you know, I said, picking up the notepad and pen again. Well, local police haven't been any help. They say she's a grown woman and can do what she wants. They won't even take the clues we have. It's a hard truth to accept, but adults do have the right to walk away from their lives without telling anyone. Sadly, that meant investigations stalled until there was proof something nefarious happened. By that time, if there was a killer involved, they were in the wind. Okay, let's start from the beginning. First, what's your daughter-in-law's name? Delaney Whitby. She's 26. Beautiful. A wonderful girl. Where does she live? Just a few blocks from here. Tell me about the last time you saw her. She called me one afternoon. It was just an average Wednesday, nothing out of the ordinary. I'd just finished preparing dinner. We had chicken divan that night, and were going to eat around 5, but Delaney called me a little after 4, so we pushed the dinner back. She sounded cautious, subdued, like she was under a spell. The baby was screaming in the background, and I could hear the other kids playing. How many children do your son and daughter-in-law have? 5. The kids are like little stair-steps. Kaylee, the oldest, is 6, and the youngest, Clara, is almost 7 months. How long have your son and daughter-in-law been married? 8 years. Not a shotgun wedding, but they must have gotten pregnant soon after getting married. Okay, So Delaney called you. What did she say? She said, "Can you come over and watch the kids?" Of course I say yeah, but then she adds, "I need to get hamburger buns and ketchup." So I say I'll go, Take the burden off her, but she insisted on going herself. I figured she needed a break, so I said, "Yeah, I'll be there." I show up. She's not that talkative, but that's Delaney. Quiet and calm. But the kids were just kind of out of control. So I thought, yeah, she needs a break. I took the baby out of her arms, talked to the other kids, and Delaney got ready to go. All she took was her purse and keys, but before she left, she stopped, grabbed me by the shoulders and looked me in the eye. It was weird because she's not much for touching or hugging. She's a stoic girl, but she held me and said thank you, like I'd done something significant by coming over to watch the kids. Then she left. What store was she going to? They live on Adams, so I guess she was going down to Farmer Joe's. Their house is the big old one at the top of that long staircase. The stairs are crumbling a bit, and the place is kind of falling apart, but Jeff's going to fix it up. I was very familiar with the house she was referring to. It was indeed in need of repairs. Large spires out front? Yes. You can say the rest, it needs an update. Total money pit. Not unlike my own aging Victorian. I remembered seeing real estate advertisements for that house. It had gone on the market years ago when I was in graduate school. By the time I moved back to Ypsilanti, it had deteriorated under the weight of extended vacancy. I suspected that Jeff and Delaney had picked it up after it fell to an affordable amount during the recession. So you sensed that something was different before she left? Yes. Just that moment when Delaney grabbed me, that's not how she is. Did you think she would just go to the store and return? Sure. Why wouldn't she? I live close, so it wasn't odd for Delaney to call and ask me to watch the kids for a moment. She'd always just runs her errands and comes back. You mentioned she seemed subdued. Yes. She seemed to be in a trance of some sort. Like something had happened. I just thought she was tired of the kids screaming. Every mom needs a break. Especially when they're so young. You thought she was just taking a trip to the grocery store, and maybe a little extra time walking around and enjoying the lack of crying babies? Yep. Logical, right? Do you think I should have tried to see what she was thinking? No. There was no reason to think something was wrong. How long did it take before you realized that Delaney wasn't coming back? Well, I rocked the baby to sleep, which took a little while. After that, I played with the boys who were making forts in the living room. It was fun. Delaney is one of those moms who often doesn't ask for help and won't accept it when offered. I don't get enough time with the kids, so I was just enjoying it. Then I sat on the couch and thought, it's been at least an hour. I called her phone and left a message, telling her I was just checking to make sure she was okay. About 20 minutes after that, I sent a text message. Once again, no response. I started to panic once 2 hours had passed. Jeff came home, and he tried to act like there was nothing to worry about, but I could see it in his face. Something was wrong. They've been happy as far as I know, but he's quiet and private about his personal life, so if something happened before she left, I don't know about it. What did Jeff do once he was home? He started calling and texting all her friends and family. Bethany is a little older than Delaney, and she has a teenager. He told his dad his mom had left with Delaney. Naturally, we all relaxed a little. We thought, hey, she needed a break, went to get her cousin, and they're probably at a coffee house venting. But then the hours passed. Night came and went. Neither one of them had contacted their families, so Jeff went to the police. What happened at the police station? They blew him off. There was this one cop, a real prick, who basically told Jeff Delaney probably just got tired of being a wife and mother and took off. I think she's been taken. Probably trafficked, and they won't do anything about it. I figured there was more to the story, but I didn't encourage her to expound on the subject. I also was pretty sure I knew who the prick was. Detective Peter McAllister was a no-nonsense, by-the-book kind of cop. He just told it how it was, which wasn't always the best approach with victims' families. Missing person cases are inflammatory by nature. The police are never doing enough until your loved one is safe at home. I knew that story all too well. When was the cousin found? 20 days ago. She was in a desert in Utah. Some lady who lives out there found her, but that's all we know. The cops don't spend much time in that area, because it is literally a desert. No towns for 100 miles around, but they told us people who don't want to be bothered live out there. The end of the world types. Sounded like the perfect place to commit a murder, and dumped the body. Has the cousin's family been able to share any insights about why she was in Utah? Raina shook her head. Nobody wants to talk about this. 2 mothers leave their families and one turns up dead. It makes us all look bad. Like we all missed something. I thought about my husband Derek, and the days leading up to his death. It seemed like everything was fine. We were about to reconcile our marriage. I pushed away the guilt and refocused on the case. When was the last time Delaney was in contact with Jeff? Well, that's a little complicated. Jeff talked to her that afternoon, and then Delaney just up and left. I don't know why. I didn't know she was leaving, Raina said, sounding distraught and guilt-ridden. I took down a few key details, Delaney and Jeff's address, Jeff's number, and completed a basic profile. Raina wasn't the best person to give me information about the case. I needed to talk with Jeff, so I took down a few more details and told her I'd contact her in a few days. 3. Well, it's a little complicated. That statement hung in the air after Delaney Whitby left. Clearly she hadn't told me the full story, but I doubted that she had much more information than she'd given. An unsuspecting mother-in-law walked into a regular afternoon at her son and daughter-in-law's house and witnessed Delaney's last moment before disappearing. I sat at my desk and stared at the sparse notes I'd taken. Missing persons aren't explicitly excluded from the cases I take on, but it's not listed on my website. My twin brother had gone missing when I was 10. Personal experience of what happened when a family member vanished had caused me to shy away from missing person cases. Technically, my brother could still be out in the world somewhere, but no information about his whereabouts had even been found, so he was presumed dead. I'd successfully avoided missing person cases during my 5 years as a PI, but things were changing. Business was down, and I'd already turned away 3 other missing person cases over the past few months. I tended to shy away from significant crimes and elusive mysteries, but it seemed that those cases were becoming just as common as petty crimes. Martin, my assistant, had encouraged me to take on more severe cases, but after solving the murder of a suburban housewife, I'd shifted to financial crimes and other non-lethal mysteries. But the simple cases had started to dry up. I could devote all my time to Delaney's case if I took it. Martin was only coming in for a few hours a week to cut down on the payroll, and most of the time the office was quiet and empty. Delaney's case was an opportunity to get more work in the door for both of us. I couldn't just turn down the chance to work because I was uncomfortable. And even though the cousin was found dead in Utah, this could be a case of a woman leaving her family behind. Maybe she and the cousin parted ways at some point. Some adults did disappear on purpose. What if Delaney had been overwhelmed with her life and took off? That might be easy to solve, I said aloud. If nothing else, I could add solving a missing person case to my resume. Not to mention, the calendar was infinitely clear. There was plenty of time to at least do some research on Delaney's disappearance. First, I ran a few internet searches on Delaney, which turned up very little information. Perhaps she had stringent privacy controls on her accounts, but even if that were the case, I should have been able to find out if she had accounts. All the searches I ran turned up blank, which led me to think that she didn't partake in social media. This was starting to be less common, but having 5 children and a husband could make sitting on a computer an unattainable luxury. Jeff Whitby's online presence made up for whatever Delaney's lacked. He had an accountant firm in Ypsilanti, with an impressive website that showcased his academic skills and family. Jeff was a polished and attractive man with a carefully shaven auburn beard, pale face, and a short, pug-like nose. His smile was bright but unsure, as if his role as an accountant was something he'd stumbled upon. A photograph of him and his family on the About page showed a tall woman with thin brown hair, a sharp nose, and cautious eyes. That was the one thing the two had in common, their eyes. Happy, but somehow also hesitant. I stared at the image for a few minutes, enlarging the photo to get a better look. From all accounts, they were a happy couple with 4 smiling faces and 1 infant wrapped in a receiving blanket. Delaney's eyes were wide with what appeared to be joy. Her smile, full and bright, gave off the sense that she was a proud wife and mother. Intrigued and curious, I wondered where Delaney had gone. Why had she left in the first place? Around 5, I closed up shop and headed home. On the walk to the old rickety Victorian my husband purchased just days before his death, the sun warmed my face, indicating that the late blast of cold winter weather was over. The small businesses along Michigan Avenue were abuzz, with locals enjoying early dinners on patios. Born and raised in Detroit, Michigan, I'd fallen in love with Ypsilanti, a much smaller, slower city, during graduate school. Cultures meshed together and coexisted without much friction. My neighbors ranged from fraternity boys to retirees, giving the air that Ypsilanti was not off-limits to anyone. Farmers tended to the acres on the edge of town, college students filled rentals when school was in session, and a few blocks over, low-income families lived in housing projects. We'd all converge on the farmers' market or street fairs throughout the summer. As the early spring sun shone down on Michigan Avenue, I gazed down the thoroughfare, taking in its tranquility. Traffic in the area was lighter than usual. One of the colleges in the area had recently closed after a significant financial and academic scandal, reducing the number of students in town. Graduation had just taken place, and the student population had thinned out. During summer, the rest of us, non-student residents, took the city back. I decided to throw a few burgers on the grill at home, grab my laptop, and spend the evening at the picnic table in the corner of the yard. My phone rang while I was contemplating eating the second burger. "Did you miss me today?" Martin asked. "I don't know how I made it without you." Is the sarcasm a ticket for me to take a paid vacation? You wish. Actually, I did miss you coming by today. What happened? Martin waited before saying, "I'll fill you in when I see you." Anything new come in? Maybe. What do you mean, maybe? A woman stopped by today, but I don't know if it's actually anything worth taking. Why not? It's a missing person case. Well, there's a chance no one is missing, but the person she left with was found dead about 3 weeks ago. Basically, a woman asked her mother-in-law to come over and watch the kids while she ran to the store for hamburger buns, picked up her cousin, and never returned. Seems like something that would have been on the news. I haven't seen anything like that anywhere. Yeah, the mother-in-law says the police wouldn't help, which leads me to believe there's more to the story. I'm going to stop by the precinct tomorrow and find out what McAllister has to say. You think they left on their own accord? Yeah, I think that might be the case. Delaney, the one that's still missing, resisted offers from the mom-in-law to go shopping for her, and she's a stay-at-home mom with 5 young kids. She could have had a breakdown of some sort and left. I didn't ask too many questions because the woman was upset. I think I'll get a better idea of what's going on from McAllister. A mystery. So the mother-in-law, not the husband, came to the office? Yeah. The mother-in-law showed up. Her name's Raina, and she feels guilty about it because she's the last person to see her. I know missing person cases aren't your thing, but we need some work. True, but this might not be anything. Well, you said one of them is dead. Yes, but she's not the one we're looking for. We don't have proof that they were together. It's been 6 months since they went missing. Maybe the missing lady murdered her cousin. It's possible. I'll give you a call after I talk with McAllister. They bought plane tickets and left. Nothing more, nothing less, Peter McAllister said. He leaned against his desk, arms folded over his chest and his long, lanky legs crossed at the ankle. I'd gotten to the precinct just after 9 that morning and told McAllister I was considering taking Delaney's case. We'd ended up unofficially working a case a few years back when I was on leave after Derek's death. After taking a few moments to catch up, McAllister filled me in on what he knew. Her mother-in-law seems to think she was abducted or something like that. She has no reason to think that. I'll tell you the story. When I'm done, tell me what you think. Deal. Don't leave anything out. Okay. Here we go. Delaney Whitby is a 26-year-old woman with 5 kids, one right after the other. She's got a bunch of infants and toddlers to look after, and some probably aren't even a year apart. One day, she calls her mother-in-law and asks her to come over and watch the kids so she can run to the store and get ketchup and hamburger buns. The mother-in-law does the nice thing and offers to just pick the stuff up and drop it off. Delaney says no. She wants to be the one to go and get it. The mother-in-law reads between the lines and thinks that Delaney needs a break. So she goes over. Everything seems normal. She's not flustered and the kids are fine. She even chats with the mother-in-law for a few minutes. About 15 minutes into the visit, Delaney grabs her phone and purse. After that, out the door she goes. Doesn't sound like she was planning on running off. Right, but stay tuned because things get weird. Alright, what happens next? The mother-in-law was having fun with the kids, but she's worried after some time has passed. By the time the husband gets there, about 2 hours later, she's frantic. She called Delaney a few times. No answer. The mother-in-law even calls the store and asks if they've seen her. Did anyone at the store remember seeing her? No, and there's a good reason for that. We don't think Delaney was ever planning on going to the store. She was never there. In fact, she was at her cousin's house about 20 minutes after she left. With rush hour traffic, she had to have headed there immediately after leaving the house. But wait for more on that. You have to listen to how this thing unfolds. The husband comes the next morning and wants to file a missing person report. So, after encouraging him to check with family and friends, we file the missing persons report and wait to hear back from him. We follow up a few days later, but as we're digging into the case, the husband acknowledges that a suitcase and some of Delaney's clothes are missing. At that point, we knew something else was going on. We also checked with the Canton police to see what they knew about the cousin. Guess what? What? No report was ever filed. Bethany's husband said they'd been discussing divorce, and she wanted him to keep the kids. So naturally, at this point, we're very suspicious of everything. We asked the husband to check his accounts, and that's when we found out that Delaney had taken $10,000 from their savings. The guy is an accountant and the only one that works in the house, but he had no clue what was happening with the bank accounts. The money's from an inheritance the husband's grandfather left him. Wow. Okay. This is not what I expected. Do you think she owed someone money? Nope. She took the money to finance her getaway. Another account showed the purchase of 2 plane tickets to Salt Lake City, Utah. So she just took off and he knows where she is? That's our conclusion, but the husband thinks she's being held against her will. Strange, because it doesn't look like anyone came and got her and the cousin. Once we found out about the plane tickets, we checked, and Delaney's car was at the airport. She also withdrew a substantial amount of money and went back to a place she and her husband lived at one time. There is no case to be investigated. And just in case you're thinking the cousin was murdered, the cause of death isn't back yet, but she was found in the middle of the Great Basin. A cop out there told me people go missing and die of exposure in that area on a regular basis. Do you have any copies of documents from Bethany's death? McAllister folded his arms. Wilcox, you aren't actually thinking about entertaining this case, are you? This sounds like a domestic issue, but a woman is dead, and she left with Delaney. I just want to know more. Fine. I'll let you have a look at the documents. Can I have copies? I flashed a big smile at McAllister. He shook his head. Wilcox, I can't just give that stuff out and you know it. I'm considering taking the case. The death might be a murder that is being passed off as a natural death because it happened in the desert. McAllister shook his head and dug a folder out from underneath a bunch of paperwork on his desk. He tossed it onto the edge of the desk. I opened it and gasped. The photo of Bethany caught me off guard. She was lying on her back with her arms above her head like she had been scared to death. Her leathery mouth was wide open and her eyes bulged out of her skull. Two stick-like legs were twisted to the side, and floral-patterned prairie dress she wore was filthy. She couldn't have weighed more than 100 pounds. This girl did not die of natural causes. Look at her, I said, opening the folder and pulling out the picture. He nodded. Okay, the pictures are bad, but look at her legs. Have you seen pictures of her before she went missing? No. McAllister moved the pages in the folder out of the way and pointed to a headshot of Bethany. Her cheeks were round and full. Again, this woman was murdered. Look, I know she looked terrible in that picture, but she did this to herself. Bethany had never been to Utah. She followed Delaney there. We don't know why or where, but clearly there's some mental stuff going on. Don't take this case. And just to make sure you understand the depth of how weird this thing is, after we told the husband there's nothing we can do, he threw a fit and showed us text messages from Delaney. Okay. I'll bite. What did the messages say? Basically, they were messages telling him that she was in Utah and was searching for the truth, with a capital T. So he wanted to file a missing person report, even though he'd received messages from her. Correct. But not just text messages. The husband also spoke with her on the phone. So he's telling us all this and we're just dumbfounded. I mean, the woman left him. Seemed clear to us. Sounds like it. You mentioned truth. What truth are you referring to? Now you see why we want nothing to do with this case. From what we learned, Delaney was incredibly busy and she needed an outlet. Apparently, she was on the computer a lot, and the husband didn't really know what she was doing. He said she was becoming very religious, in a way that wasn't healthy, as how he put it. As far as the truth, I think she was just looking for an escape. It did sound like a strange situation. Bethany's death didn't seem natural to me, but her family wasn't trying to hire me. Delaney, who was obviously still alive, didn't need me traveling to Utah to hunt her down. The mother-in-law came to see me yesterday. She wanted me to talk with the husband. Initially it sounded a bit sketchy, but now that I know this woman voluntarily left and the husband knows where she is, there's no need to even meet with him. And just to make sure you know how okay this lady is, the husband told us that he's heard from her several times more. Text messages and even a second phone call. They're all short exchanges focused on truth, but the fact that he's had verbal conversations seals the deal. It's not like he got one text message and that was it. That could have been staged by someone holding her hostage or something, but a few friends they have in Utah have reached out to mention that they have seen her around town. This guy needs a lawyer, not a private investigator. I think you're right. Thanks for talking to me. I'll still take copies of the report if that's okay. McAllister nodded his head. Be my guest. You know, Wilcox, we could always use a great cop around here. You're too skilled to be out there dealing with wackos like Jeff Whitby. I haven't met him yet, but I don't think he's a wacko. He's struggling with the kids and misses his wife, who has apparently left him. He doesn't know why she isn't home with him, and I imagine he's very stressed. You're too nice, Wilcox. We'd still take you in a heartbeat. 4. Can you just look a little deeper? There's something more going on, I swear. Raina Whitby's voice was strained and low. I'd waited 3 days after I visiting the precinct to call. I really want to help, but it looks like Delaney left on her own accord, and Detective McAllister says that Jeff has been in touch with her. But what if she's being held against her will? The facts didn't point to that, but I understood how Raina felt. Her loved one was missing. I considered how to let her down easily. She's such a wonderful woman. We just want her back, Raina said, choking back a sob. My heart ached for her. I knew what it was like to have a missing loved one, and no way to get them back. Even though Delaney had left on her own, that didn't stop them from missing her. I'll tell you what. If anything changes, I will head out to Utah and do my best to bring her home. After a few sobs, Raina said, "Thank you." Her voice was shaking with emotion. I suspected Delaney would be home soon. She probably just had some type of breakdown and needed to get away from a while, or she'd show up with divorce papers. Either way, there was no case. Raina begged me to take one more look into things for a few more minutes, before I reassured I would definitely step in if anything changed. "Do we have a new case?" Martin asked, as he walked through the door an hour later. "No. There really isn't a case." "What are we going to do?" Working with others wasn't something that came naturally to me. I'd always been a lone wolf, but I'd taken Derek's younger brother under my wing after he passed away. Martin had become my friend and provided companionship, but I wondered if he was thinking about quitting because of the reduction of work. "Hey, don't worry. The paychecks won't stop coming. In the meantime, let's get out of here for a while." "Where are we going?" "Just trust me." "So we're not taking the case?" Martin asked as we climbed into my Ford Taurus. "We're taking some time off to enjoy an early summer-like day." I adjusted the radio so that it was a smidge too loud for us to have a conversation. Folksy and soothing music filled the car as we rolled down the windows and let the warm breeze in. Cruising down Michigan Avenue to Prospect, we hung a left on Geddes Road and drove to Ann Arbor, cruising past idyllic rolling fields and small neighborhoods until we reached the gates of the Nichols Arboretum. We parked and headed to the wetland boardwalk. "What are we doing here?" "Shush," I said, holding my index finger to my lips. I looped my arm through Martin's, and we strolled along the edge of the Huron River. Birds and bees buzzed through the air, their rhythm meshing to create a soft, tranquil hum. Thick trees and bushes swallowed us as we moved deeper into the brush. "The agency isn't doing too well, huh?" "Things have been slow. There are real issues that need to be solved. Murders and missing person cases, why aren't we working on those?" My brother vanished in a thicket over overgrown trees. Every time I get a free moment, I think I should look into his case again, because there's a void in my life that can't be filled. Working missing person cases brings all of that back. It means nightmares and what-ifs. It's too much. I understand. I've lost my brother too. But you know where he is. I don't know what happened to Simon, and remember, your brother was my husband. Cut me some slack here. I'm doing the best I can to get through life. And I left the police force for a reason. I don't want to spend nights lying wide awake thinking about the cases I haven't solved. I've already got a few personal instances of that in my life. Don't you want more meaningful work? Have you thought about law school recently? That question always elicited a shake of his head and a sigh, as if the suggestion was outlandish. I wondered if we'd spent too much time together. Martin had gone from being a boy to a man under my tutelage. We'd begun to bump heads about the direction of the agency and his future. My suggestions sounded motherly and overbearing, and his ideas seemed immature. "Did you bring me here to let me go?" I stopped walking and let go of Martin's arm. "What?" "I figure you can't really afford to have an assistant, right? That's not in the cards. Are you saying that you want to leave?" Tension filled the space between us. My phone rang, interrupting the moment. "No rest for the wicked," Martin said, a nervous smile on his face. I let the phone buzz a few more times before swiping to answer. "Sylvia Wilcox," I said. "You're going to think I'm crazy, but something has already happened." Raina's voice caused a wave of anxiety to pass over me. Martin's eyes widened and he mouthed, "Who is it?" "Things have changed in the last few hours?" I asked. "Yes. There's been a development." Jeff doesn't know where Delaney is. Does that change your mind? Martin moved beside me and stuck his ear to the backside of the phone. Tell me more. I just talked to Jeff, and he told me it's been a week since he's heard from her. Some friends in Provo told him they haven't seen her in days, and a welfare check by the police didn't locate her. She's really missing now, Raina said, her voice filled with excitement. Why had I made that promise? Meet me at the office in an hour. I ended the call and looked up at the sky in frustration. What happened? Don't act like you weren't listening. I know you heard it all. Martin giggled and shook his head. I just wanted to be close so I could support you. I wasn't eavesdropping. Well, now they don't know where the wife is, according to the mother-in-law. I don't know what to do about this, but after talking with McAllister, I honestly think this guy is up against a divorce, and he just doesn't know it yet. He knows she's okay, right? Well, it's complicated. First of all, I haven't had any conversations with the husband, which makes me wonder if he knows something his mother doesn't. Like divorce papers being served? Exactly. So the husband knew the wife was okay, as of a week ago, according to the mother-in-law. Here's the backstory. Delaney and her cousin bought plane tickets for Utah, and she also withdrew $10,000 before she left. There's no reason to think that someone pressured her to do any of that. Is the husband naive, in denial, or what? No idea. I haven't met with Jeff, the husband, yet. Yet? Sounds like you're still considering taking the case. I'm a sucker for the families of missing persons. Raina arrived about 10 minutes after Martin, and I got back to the office. Thank you, Mrs. Wilcox. I'm so glad you're looking into this. Let's go over a few things. I'll need to speak with Jeff as soon as possible. I've already told him you'd need to do that. Would you mind stopping by? I cringed inside. Meeting on someone else's turf could be infuriating. There was no way of knowing what you were walking into, and it could make it difficult to control the interview. Sure. Thanks again for taking the case. This is so good of you, Raina said, taking a seat in front of my desk. This is my assistant, Martin Bainbridge, I said, motioning toward Martin. Nice to meet you, Raina said. The two shook hands. Tell me everything that you know about what has happened since we last spoke. Jeff has been upset, and my husband and I have tried to be supportive without being overbearing. We help as much as we can with the kids, and I take over meals. This is a strange situation. No one knows how to act. We just expected that he would tell us everything that was going on. I mean, why wouldn't he? I nodded, hoping that was enough of an answer for her to continue. So we thought he was still talking with Delaney, but this afternoon I was over there helping with the kids, and he told me it has been over a week since he's spoken to her. I was shocked. I thought they were talking regularly, and he was getting her in her right mind, but that's not true, and the friends they have out there haven't seen her. I think she's been taken. That seemed like a jump, but I nodded and waited for more. I was starting to think they had a little tiff, and something just got under her skin, but now I think something has happened to her. She was a troubled teen from what I've heard. Do you know much about her family? Not much, but her parents live on Beaver Island. They're kind of hippies, but super nice people. Jeff likes them a lot, but Delaney isn't too keen on them. She's very prim and proper, and her parents are like, well, let's just say they're the opposite. Jeff and Delaney have been dating since high school, and even then, her parents were a bit disconnected. She lived in Ann Arbor with an aunt when she was young. Jeff can tell you more than I can. I'm sure his hands are full of the children, but I'll try to set something up for tomorrow. Thank you. I feel like I owe it to Jeff. You know what I mean. I didn't see the signs, and now she's gone. Need to help him out if I can. By the way, I'll take the bill for this. 5. I called Jeff after the meeting with Raina, and left a voicemail asking what days and times I could stop by. The next morning I woke up just before 6, and took a short run downtown through Riverside Park and was in the office by 8. Jeff had left a message the night before. "I'm free tomorrow between noon and 1 if you want to stop by." The wail of a child drowned out the rest of what he had to say. Around 11:35, I grabbed my briefcase and headed to Jeff Whitby's house. The house was only 3 blocks from the office, so I decided to walk. The sprawling home was built in the Empire style, with a long row of crumbling concrete stairs. I carefully scrambled to the top of the steps, hopping from one substantial remnant to the next, finally arriving at the front door. I rang the doorbell and heard the commotion of a man yelling inside. Waiting patiently on the porch, I listened to the pitter-patter of little feet rushing through the house, and another burst of loud instructions being shouted through the home. I considered leaving, but just as I was backing away from the house, the double doors were yanked open. A man wearing a starched white shirt and dark blue slacks stood panting in the door. His short curly hair was fluffed on the top of his head, and his face was red. "Yes?" "Hi, Mr. Whitby." "Yes?" "Who are you?" "Sylvia Wilcox. Your mother told me that you need a private investigator." "Oh gosh. I forgot. Sorry, Mrs. Wilcox. Please come in." The man slapped his hand against the side of his head, pushing down his curls. "I can come back later, if this is a bad time." No. Please come in." "I'm so sorry," Jeff said, opening the door and placing his hand on my back, guiding me into the house. "Thank you, Mr. Whitby," I said, feeling a little uncomfortable. I chalked it up to the fact that he was going through a tough time. "I'm really struggling without Delaney. My mom is on the way over, but she's running late, so we might be interrupted by the kids." I nodded and smiled. A child screamed off in the distance. "Oh goodness," Jeff muttered before rushing off. He returned with a baby in his arms. "We can sit in the family room. This way." The house was large and sparsely decorated with old worn furniture. It looked like they had bought the place as is, and while the furnishing was clean, it was well past its prime. Even so, the decor showed signs of regalness shining through the dust and faded furniture. "I love the house," I said, sitting down on a brown leather loveseat. "Do you? That makes one of us. Delaney loves old stuff, and we picked it up at the bottom of the market, so I guess there are some good points of owning this thing. I have an old Victorian a few blocks over." "Really? I guess you're pretty handy." "Not in the least. Brave lady. I wish I could unload this thing. It's too much work, and it costs a fortune to heat the darn place." The little girl on his lap started to moan. "Oh, sweetie. What do you need?" Jeff asked, looking at the baby as if she was going to answer. Jeff Whitby gently swaddled the girl and began rocking, slow and steady, on the couch. "Mr. Whitby, I'd like to hear about the day your wife went missing." Well, it was an ordinary Wednesday morning. Delaney was up with the baby throughout the night. Clara had a fever. I was out of bed a little early to take the baby, so she could get a couple more minutes of sleep before I left for work. I know taking care of the 5 kids has definitely taken a toll on her, and the homeschooling was overly ambitious. "What hours do you work?" "That depends. I just started my own practice, so it means that my hours are sporadic. I can't work from home with all the kids here, so I have to get things done at the office." "What's an average workday?" 10 to 12 hours a day. 16 hours during tax season, but I really try to close up shop after 8 hours. "Did Delaney have any assistance with the children when you were gone?" "Not really, but that was only because she didn't want it. My mom would totally come over and help if Delaney wanted or needed it. She only called Mom when things were tough." Feeling I had a good understanding of the family dynamic, I moved on. "Okay. What else happened the day she left?" "That morning was typical for us. I got ready for work, we had breakfast together, and then I headed to the office. We talked around lunchtime. Delaney told me she was cooking burgers and fries, and updated me on Clara. Her fever was gone and the other kids were doing fine. That was it. No sign that she was taking off that evening." When did you realize that she had left on her own accord? The police asked me to check for missing clothing and bank account usage. I was resistant to those ideas at first, so it took a few days for me to actually check. When I did, I found out that Delaney had withdrawn money in small intervals over time. She also took a suitcase and some clothing. When did the withdrawals begin? That's the insane part. She started taking money out of the savings 6 months ago, soon after Clara was born. I had no idea. Delaney handles the finances? I know what that look on your face means, and yes, it's strange that I let Delaney handle the money, but she insisted. She had some books from the Victorian era. She wanted to be like those women, and they truly did it all, including managing the household funds. Interesting. So Delaney handled most things, except for bringing in an income? Jeff's face began to turn red. He ran a hand through his short dark hair before saying, "I didn't see it." She was overwhelmed. She wanted a very traditional family, but it was too much, wasn't it? Jeff, like his mother, seemed to be struggling with a great deal of guilt and doubt. I chose my words carefully. Sometimes people don't know what they want. Good point. Thank you for saying that. When was the last time you talked with her? 8 days ago. Delaney told me that she was looking for the truth. It was just a text message, so I didn't get much information, but it wasn't something I expected to come from her. Delaney has always been very sure of herself. Could this be a mental break with reality? Possibly, but if it is, it came totally out of the blue. Can you think of any other reason why she would leave? No. Well, I guess I should say we were happy. What can you tell me about your marriage? It's a normal marriage. We're happy. We have the kids, I work, and Delaney stays home to raise the babies. But like I said, it was exactly what she wanted. Did Delaney work before you guys were married? She did, but left her job once we started having children. You didn't mind her working? Not at all. In fact, I thought it was a good idea for Delaney to work. I was afraid she might feel trapped, staying home all day with the kids. If Delaney wants space or time away from home, I will support that. I don't know why she would just up and leave like this. And now she won't respond to my calls or text messages. Something has to be wrong. Did you two argue often? Of course. What couple doesn't? I'm asking whether or not the arguments were intense and frequent, or if there was something that seemed to be a sticking point between the two of you. We moved back here after I graduated from Brigham Young University. We're both from Michigan, so being in Utah was nice for a while, but it was good to get back home. Provo can be overwhelming at times. How so? I'm dedicated to my faith, but I like having some contrast. My friends back here challenge me and help me keep a well-rounded view of the world. Provo was okay, but after 4.5 years of school, I wanted out of the bubble. There was no contrast in my life, and I need that. And Delaney was on board with that decision? After a time. Initially, Delaney was reluctant to return to Michigan. She resents her family for not giving her any type of religious path in life. So, she kind of got sucked into an unhealthy element of being surrounded by people who have the exact same ideas as she does. That tends to breed zealots. Just another reason why I wanted to come back to Michigan. What would you say were the most extreme side effects for Delaney from being in that type of culture? We fought a lot more when we lived in Provo. There are great people in Utah, but the place is isolated. I spent my early childhood in Grand Rapids and moved to Ann Arbor when I was 13. Religion wasn't a big deal for my friends. We cared about silly things like whether you were rooting for the Spartans or the Wolverines. I'd rather have trivial fun things guide my social life. There are different types of people in Ann Arbor, and I love having friends from all walks of life. I miss the way difference enhances life. Utah was too homogeneous. Everyone had a similar story. How bad was the argument about coming back to Michigan? It was your average argument. Nothing major. Are we talking a tug of war, back and forth for months, or a single blow-up and resolution? Jeff shook his head and sighed. Okay. I see what you're getting at. Yes. We had some issues. Yes, this was a big one, but no, I don't think it has anything to do with her being gone. I bought this house while we were in Utah. Delaney found it online, and it was too cheap to pass up, so we bought sight unseen. We always planned on coming back here. So the arguments we had were futile. That has nothing to do with why she's not here. The fact that she had unexpectedly traveled to Utah indicated otherwise. I wanted more information, but decided to drop the subject. What did Delaney do with her time when she wasn't at home? The kids kept her busy, but she often got together with friends on Thursday nights. I'll need to talk to her friends. Of course. What can you tell me about Delaney's cousin, Bethany? He shook his head. She was a mess. Like I told you, Delaney resents her family, but she lived with Bethany's parents for a while, so their relationship is more like distant sisters than cousins. Bethany was the only one who would listen to Delaney about religion and all that stuff, so they had started to get close. But in the past, Bethany dabbled in drugs and her marriage was a wreck. I didn't say much when Delaney would go hang out with her because it was a break from all her responsibilities. Have you heard anything about the investigation into her death? Only that they aren't sure if she was murdered or not. I've spoken to her husband once. We're not close. Did Bethany ever live in Utah? Never. Delaney must have asked her to travel with her. No one knows why. I made a mental note to reach out to Bethany's husband and switch subjects. Are there any other family members who might know why she left town? She has one brother, Chris. He lives part-time on Beaver Island and part-time in Ann Arbor. Her parents, Mitch and Angie, live on Beaver Island. How much contact does she have with them? Well, she's a bit estranged from her parents, but I talk to them on a regular basis. Is there anything about their feud that you think could be related to Delaney's disappearance? I doubt it. They're just very free people, and Delaney resents that fact. Free people? Yeah, I guess you might call them hippies. How is her relationship with Chris? Complicated. They're both gamers, but once we started having kids, Delaney had less time for games. Chris is older but single and free to play as much as he likes. That was their connection. So when Delaney started cutting down on her screen time, the two drifted apart. Does she have a lot of friends? Delaney's social circle is small. It revolves around our church. Delaney and her friends would take turns getting together at each other's homes. I'll write down their names and numbers, but I recommend only calling Terry. Why should I only call Terry? She's older and wiser. You might say she's the leader of the group. Terry also lives in Canton, so she's close. I'll give you her number. Okay. I'd like to talk with her parents and brother as well. What else can you tell me about Delaney? She didn't have a lot of free time, but we'd had a few disagreements about the amount of time she spent on the computer. My mind shifted to an infidelity angle. Was she playing games or chatting with someone? I'm not sure what she was doing. She said it was her me time, so I let her have it. It may be helpful to search her computer for information. Okay. You can take her laptop with you. I tried to give it to the cops, but they didn't want it. Delaney has a notepad with all of her usernames and passwords. She's not into social media or anything like that, but like I said, she loves games. Maybe there are clues there. I doubt it, but I could have missed something. Great. May I see the text messages you received? Jeff sighed before moving the baby to a swing next to the couch and pulling out his cell phone. It's not much, but here's what I have. Jeff handed me his phone. Jeff, where are you? Everyone is worried. What's happening? Delaney, don't worry. I have a mission to complete. Jeff, call me. Please call me. I need to hear your voice. I need you home. What is going on? Delaney, I am fine. Jeff, I'm not. I've gone to the police. Delaney, where are you? Please tell me what's wrong. Delaney, I'm in Utah. Searching for the truth. The text messages seemed to just go around in circles. You had a few verbal conversations as well? I asked. Yes. Delaney called the day after the text messages. Her voice was calm and low, and I got the feeling someone was telling her what to say. Why did you think that? She was talking about truth and how some people have it, while others don't. Something about a chosen few, and the prophet was one of those people. Is this the first you've heard of a prophet? Jeff scratched the back of his head. An uncomfortable look came across his face. Yes. Sharing any theological difficulties will help me with the search. I'm not here to judge, so please be as forthcoming as you can. Jeff shook his head and sighed. She was struggling in some ways with the faith. We had an argument about me wanting to go out to eat after church on Sundays. My family always did that when I was growing up, and I thought it would be a break for her. But Delaney got mad about it. I mean, there are overzealous people who don't dine out on Sunday or even take off their church clothes when they come home, but I'd argue that they are taking things to an extreme. We aren't Puritans. Delaney had read some books that made it seem holier to observe some strict Sunday observances. I have to admit, that was quite a hot-button issue. Anything else? I'd pulled a notepad out of my briefcase and was jotting down notes. Not really. Other than that, it was just the usual stuff. She told me about wanting a traditional life, so we worked to make that happen. As you can see, one income doesn't really allow us to do all the things we need to around here, but we're staying afloat. Your mother mentioned that Delaney had been in touch with friends in Provo. Yes. A few friends in Provo have told me they've seen her around. One friend called me up and said he was so excited that we were moving back to Utah. Apparently, Delaney has been telling people she's there to prepare the way for us to move. Of course, that makes zero sense, so after being questioned about it, she started saying she was in town for a few days, but now she's slipped off the radar. So she's no longer in Provo? None of our friends have seen or talked to her in days, so my guess is no. Any clues on where she might have gone? No. She's looking for some type of truth, according to her text message. Any idea what she means when she speaks of searching for the truth? Jeff shook his head. No. I thought we had all the truth we needed. Is there any other information you think will help find Delaney? There are a few other things. This is going to start off strange, but bear with me. I nodded and flipped to a new page in the notepad. Delaney discovered that she had ancestors who were part of the Strangites, a break-off sect of the Mormon Church that now has a small faction in Wisconsin. Before they moved to Wisconsin, the Strangites were on Beaver Island in Michigan. After Joseph Smith was killed, Mormondom was in limbo. There was a fight over who should be the leader of the church. There was a split, and James Strang led some of the Mormons to Beaver Island, where he declared himself King Strang. Brigham Young took another faction to Utah, and Emma Smith, Joseph Smith's widow, thought that Joseph Smith's son should be the next leader of the church, so she stayed put. The different factions would become the RLDS, LDS, and the Strangites. All still exist today. Delaney was learning about the differences between the three, and she seemed to become a bit confused. Complicated history. Yeah. Over time, the church continued to split. The idea that a prophet receives private revelations has caused many to say that they are prophets. If they can convince a group of people to follow them, they start a new faction. So, Delaney discovered that she had ancestors who were part of the Strangites, and she's trying to find out who was right. I think that's the case. She had a great aunt, back in the 1800s, who headed out to Utah to join the LDS, but she did so when polygamy was a major tenet of the religion. She had several children there, before fleeing the territory and moving back to Michigan. What was Delaney's religious affiliation as a child? Nothing. Her family was agnostic at best. No church attendance at all. Sometimes people who didn't have religion as a child feel like they missed out on something. That is the case, according to her parents. They seem like good parents, who were kind of strict in some ways, but they didn't give her religion. She resents them for that. Is Delaney completely estranged from them? I wouldn't go that far. She's just not jazzed that they didn't raise her with any type of religion structure. Our religion in particular, because it was part of their heritage. Thank you for sharing that information. That's very helpful to know. Is there anything else I should know? She has been obsessed with her family history, one woman in particular. Anna was Delaney's great-aunt times 5. This woman, Anna, left her husband and 4 kids and moved to Utah. Delaney recently found out that Anna became a plural wife and had 4 more children once she was out west. At first, it was an interesting twist that I thought should be celebrated, to a point. An ancestor is an ancestor, but Delaney started to kind of idolize this woman. Some of her distant cousins in Utah had the woman's diary. I thought it was weird because the passages in Anna's diary made her sound a bit off. Such as, this was when she started speculating about if we were in the right church. Was this an ongoing concern? Yeah. Delaney started to ask if the gospel had been adulterated. If we were apostates. So the idea was that you guys were wrong, and other people were right? Pretty much. I was concerned because of the extreme doctrines, polygamy and blood atonement, bothered me. Delaney was open to being in a polygamous situation? I would like to say no, but now. I think she may have considered it from time to time. Is blood atonement what I think it is? Yes. Killing the unfaithful. Got it. Is the Beaver Island Church still around? Yes. It's super small, but Delaney wasn't intrigued by that sect. She seems to be into Brighamite sects, churches that came from the Brigham Young movement. There's a distant cousin out in Utah, filling her head with all types of things. He grew up LDS, but there are plenty of sects out there that practice polygamy. His name is Jebediah Christensen. What's his story? He's out in Utah, seems to be a bit of a zealot. Delaney would bring up all this weird stuff he'd tell her. Something about a mine she needed to invest in, and he'd talk about how they were related to Strang. Well, it turns out that's not true, and even though Delaney and I went through all the genealogy and proved that the Strang relation was false, she continued to listen to this guy. I thought she'd let go of all the crazy things he'd told her, but after a few days of her being gone, she sent me a text message that said, "Don't worry. I'm fine. Don't come after me." Needless to say, I was worried and considered going after her, but my parents encouraged me to let her do her thing. After all, we have 5 kids. Someone has to be here to take care of them. So I respected her wishes and figured after a few days, she'll be back. Friends were calling and texting, telling me they'd seen her in town. A week passed, and I started getting antsy, so I called and demanded to know if she was coming back home or what. She was vague. Told me she was searching for something, but would definitely be back home at some point. That's when I told her I expected her to be home within the next week. And what did she say to that? She told me that it wasn't my decision to make. So I said, okay. Well, I need you to make a responsible decision. And you know what she said? No. She told me it wasn't her decision either. Whose decision did she say it was? She didn't say. Make me think that this Jebediah guy is telling her not to come home. I didn't want to bring up the obvious point. Jebediah and Delaney were distant cousins. A romantic relationship between them was possible. How long has it been since she left? A month. The last time I heard from her was 5 days ago, almost a week. Utah is out of my league. I don't have any connections there, and I'm unfamiliar with the culture, but I told your mother I'd do what I can. My cousin is a bishop out there. He can give you information about the culture and places to look for Delaney. Have you considered hiring a PI in Utah? Yes, but my mom says you're good. She read some long articles about what you did when the college students were being murdered. And I'd rather go with a Michigander. I hadn't been out west in a while. I could always head to Utah, find out if Delaney was coming back or not, and keep going to the coast. A little R&R near the ocean sounded like the perfect way to start off the summer. It will be expensive. I have the money. Don't worry about that. I caught myself. Perhaps Jeff's mother hadn't told him she was paying. You pay at the end, so no need to worry about that for now. No deposit? Not at this time. Okay. Let me know when you need payment. I nodded and waited. I think that's all I really know, Jeff said, his forehead wrinkled as if he was in deep thought. The baby was starting to fuss in the swing, and I felt like Jeff had told me all he knew about why his wife was missing. It also seemed he didn't know her very well. I will start doing the preliminary work. I just need the addresses of Delaney's friends and family, and I can get started. Jeff fidgeted as he wrote down information for Delaney's parents and friends. We stood up and headed towards the door. Do you think you can bring Delaney home? I'll do what I can. 6. I headed back to the office, walking slow and steady. In a bit of a daze, I analyzed the visit. Jeff hadn't been in tune with his wife. What she'd been doing on her computer was a mystery. The bank withdrawal had been made without his knowledge, and he didn't have any concrete theories about why she left. I still didn't have a good feel for who she was. I decided that my next step would be calling her parents. The phone rang twice before a deep throaty voice said, "Yeah?" Taken aback by the greeting, I paused a moment before saying, "May I speak to Mitchell or Angie Blakely?" "You got him. Mitch, that is, but Ang is here too." "What's up?" "My name is Sylvia Wilcox, and I am a private investigator. Your son-in-law has hired me to look into your daughter's disappearance." "She ain't disappeared." "Oh. Is Delaney on Beaver Island?" Mitchell let out a loud laugh before saying, "You want to find out? Come to Beaver. We'll make you feel at home." "Mr. Blakely." "Wilcox, right?" "Yes. I want to help, and I'm totally flattered that you took the time to call us. We usually get overlooked for everything. We're up north, and we're on a frickin' island, so people think we're just out of sight, out of mind, but that ain't the case. You coming up or what?" "Mr. Blakely, I am trying to locate." "I know. You're looking for our wild child. Well, come on up and talk with us. This is too much to discuss over the phone. No real detective relies on phone work." He had a point. These were Delaney's parents. So far, the information from Jeff and his mother had been sparse. I needed to hear from people who knew Delaney well. Besides, Beaver Island was a great place to visit. "Thank you for the invitation, Mr. Blakely. When is a good time to come up?" Well. You're the real deal. And it's Mitch. Where do you live?" "Ypsilanti." "Well, way downstate." "Okay, well, you're free to come up any weekday. Afternoon works best. So you could drive up one of these days, we'll make your lunch and tell you what we know about our daughter." "That would be great. Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. You don't know what I'm going to tell you," he said, laughing. Mitchell Blakely gave me directions and his address before we ended the call. I headed home after, but was back in the office by 7:30 the next morning. Martin showed up around 8. "We need a vacation," I said as soon as Martin entered the office. Martin waited a moment, rolled his eyes, and headed to his desk. "Good morning," Martin said, taking a seat and propping his feet up on the desk's edge. "I'm serious. Let me guess. This vacation is connected to a case." "A vacation is a vacation, right? What's the case? Where are we going, and what do we know so far?" All good questions. I only had a complete answer for one. "We have a new case, but it's complicated. It's the Delaney Whitby case. The lady that went to Utah." I knew you were going to take that case. What do we know? Martin asked. Not much. I need you to dig through Delaney Whitby's computer and find something. I have the usernames and passwords for the most frequently visited sites, but we both know there's more to it than that. Right? Delaney didn't write down the usernames and passwords we need to unlock her secrets. Correct. So, we need to find out what other sites she was going to and why. Also, since this is not a criminal case or anything that will ever be in a courtroom, get the info any way you can. Got it. And finally, I'm heading up to Beaver Island on Thursday. I might end up spending the night there. Want to come? Beaver Island? What's up there? Delaney's parents. Can't you just call and talk to them? I tried that, but her father laughed and said talking about their daughter over the phone wasn't appropriate. It sounds like they might know something. It's late May and Beaver Island is beautiful, so I figure, why not? I'm in. Have you talked to the husband? Yes. Jeff is attractive, mild-mannered, and the breadwinner. They've been married 8 years, but he doesn't seem to know that much about her. Does he know why she wanted to go to Utah? He has an inkling. She's from Beaver Island, a place where there once was a little Mormon sect called the Strangites. Some of her ancestors were in it. After the leader was murdered, one of her great-aunts abandoned her family and headed west to join the LDS sect in Utah. So she's got distant cousins there, and she'd been tracing her family tree. Are you sure about this case? This sounds a bit out of our league. Are we going to have to do a full-scale history lesson to know what we're doing? I thought you wanted to take more complicated cases? We'll start doing some of that tomorrow. Pack some clothes and we'll head north in the morning. To Beaver Island? Yep. We'll probably stay the night. I'll book us a place. Okay, it's almost June, so it should be okay, right? Yeah, but this is Michigan. I can't make any promises. Martin's face fell. He had a fear of driving in the snow. Are you sure? Sure about what? No snow? Yes. No snow, but things could change, so it's best to get up there as soon as possible. I winked to add some intrigue. The drive north was quiet. Martin had brought along an LSAT practice workbook. He spent the majority of the ride reading and jotting down answers before checking for accuracy. I found myself in a bit of trance as we proceeded northward. Sections of the state that I'd remembered as small but lively towns had turned into abandoned buildings and overgrown fields. Most of Michigan's population resides within a few hours of Detroit. The further north one goes, the fewer people there are, and the harsher the weather becomes. In the past, the tiny towns that dotted the middle of the lower peninsula had been lively. Now I-75 was lined with billboards that had closed scrawled across them. Things are dead around here, huh? Martin said. Seems so. It wasn't always this way. A chilled wind blew through the parking lot, but the sun warmed the side of my face. We pulled into Charlevoix around noon. Beaver Island is an isolated community. The only ways to get there is by taking a ferry or a flight. Since it was May, we were able to catch a ferry. I'd ordered tickets the night before, and we arrived just in time to start boarding our car. Was this really necessary? Martin asked as we got out of the car. Yes. Delaney's family could have valuable information for us. You know I like to see the whites of their eyes. But that was a joke. Actually, Delaney's father made a good point. This is a serious matter. It deserves more than a phone call. The ferry allowed us to check our car in half an hour before the ship set sail. After that, we boarded the boat and grabbed 2 window seats. Martin tried to maintain his composure, but the firm 2-hand grip of the railing as he walked across the gangway exposed his fear. How long is this ride? About 2 hours. Less or more? More. I can't believe I let you talk me into this. Come on, aren't you even a little intrigued? The little Mormon sect that lived on the island is intriguing. It's not a mystery, and I don't know how it figures into a housewife that goes missing in the 21st century. Still, it gives the case an interesting twist. Jeff told me Delaney said she was searching for truth. Sounds like a hunt for her identity. If that's the case, we need to see where she'd from, and hear from people who know her. I'm interested to hear what her family has to say. All of this sounds so strange. Martin wasn't a religious man. His parents hadn't raised him in any faith, so a devout follower of any religion would be confusing in his eyes. He often playfully made fun of me when I attended holy days of obligation or adoration. But those things seemed perfectly normal, even necessary to my Catholic sensibilities. So there's this thing that some religious people do. They set off on a quest to find the bona fide absolute truth. Not possible. Agreed, but that doesn't stop people from seeking that reassurance. People want moral absolutes. Think about how much more comfortable life would be if we had absolute answers for everything. This is so odd. I guess I don't get why people are so wrapped up in religion. Why do you go to church? This isn't about me. Right, but I'm curious. Why do you continue to attend and believe in organized religion? I thought for a moment before responding. Because I owe someone or something for being here. I didn't spawn from some spontaneous generation. There is a presence at Mass, and I feel like that someone or something is responsible for my existence. No one forced it upon me, and my parents left it up to me to choose. There's logic at the core of the faith. Martin nodded. Okay. Those are somewhat acceptable reasons. I laughed and said, well, thank you for allowing me those reasons. Plenty of Catholics and Protestants are on the same wavelength. I get what you're saying, but what if she just left? The fact that she took a cousin along with her makes me think this was planned, and they just wanted to abandon their families. That's a possibility. So, if she just wanted to get out of her marriage, we're taking a case that's just leading to divorce. It's risky, but there are 5 kids and a husband wondering what happened to their mother and wife. Let's just see where this goes. Maybe she'd out living her best life. But maybe she's in danger. 7. The pale turquoise waves became rougher as the shore drifted off behind us. Martin looked a little queasy as the boat rocked back and forth, up and down, back and forth, without any set pattern. My stomach turned a bit as the ferry reached a point in the lake where land wasn't easy to spot. Heavy clouds hung over the water, lowering visibility. Still, the ride was complete before the first few drops of rain fell. Being on the Great Lakes is always a fantastic experience until you get to the point where you can't see land anymore. That's the place where the waves start tossing the ferry around. Martin looked terrified as the land slipped away on all sides. This is overwhelming. Beautiful but overwhelming, Martin said, moving away from the deck railing. Let's head downstairs, I said, sparing him the embarrassment of getting sick on the top deck. We hung out below, where I watched the waves lick against the boat's side, and Martin kept his head buried in the LSAT prep book. About half an hour later, the island came into view. Paradise Bay lived up to its name. Quaint and picturesque, the fog rose off the water as we pulled into port. Buildings peeked out from behind the thick fallen clouds in the distance, and a long line of people stood on the shore waiting for the boat to dock. It felt like we were stepping onto an enchanted island. We collected the car and headed to the cottage I'd rented about a mile from the shoreline. A small, red clapboard dwelling sat at the edge of a nature trail overlooking the bay. A picnic table and grill were on the north side of the house, sitting underneath tall oaks and cottonwood trees. We grabbed our bags and headed inside. Not bad, Martin said, eyeing the couch. Don't get comfortable. We're heading to see Delaney's parents. After that, we'll come back and relax. Okay. Do you really think this is going to make a difference? We left our things in the living room and headed back out, driving into the heart of town. During the summer months, Beaver Island's population swells. Both pedestrian and foot traffic pick up, but we were too early for the rush. The streets were empty and easy to navigate. Year-round about 600 people call the island home, but on that day in May, it was clear that some tourists had taken a chance and come up to explore the island. The wind was damp and chilly, but the freshness of the breeze was soothing. Martin read off directions while I drove, and 10 minutes later we pulled in front of a steep incline. Delaney's parents lived in an A-frame that sat at the top of a hill. We parked on the side of the road and headed up the incline. A man with long, thin blonde and gray hair tied back in a ponytail and a thick bushy mustache squinted at us, clearly struggling to make out our faces. I held up my hand and waved, letting him know we were friendly, and yelled, "Mr. Blakely?" He stopped walking toward us, skepticism crossing his face before recognition eased his brow. "That's me, but call me Mitch." "Sylvia Wilcox." "The pie that called," I said. Once we got close enough to see the crow's feet in the corner of his eyes, I sprinted up the last portion of the hill and shook his hand. "This is my assistant, Martin Bainbridge. Thanks for meeting with us." "Sure thing. Thanks for coming all this way. My wife was mad that I made you come up, but I think it's important to meet face to face. I thought it was important to get your impressions and opinions of what happened with Delaney." "Well, come on up to the house. Angie and Chris are both here, ready to share what we can." Martin and I followed Mitch Blakely up to the blue A-frame. The house had slightly uneven edges, but the stairs had clearly been sculpted by a skilled carpenter. "Built it with my dad and brothers," Mitch said, noticing my extended gaze at the house's side. "It's impressive. I admire your skill. It was a dream of mine, and Angie supported it. Don't know that the kids appreciated it when we lived in the trailer out back, but Chris loves it now. He comes up and stays with us now and then. The other kid never took to it." "How long have you lived here?" Martin asked. "It's been 15 years now. We moved up here when Delaney was 11, and Chris was 13. Probably wasn't the best time for her, but we thought the kids would grow into it." "What inspired you to move to Beaver Island?" "Ironically, it was my ancestors. I guess Delaney is like us in that way. She values the past, and what her long-dead ancestors had to say about it." A gale wind blew up off Lake Michigan, hinting at the rapid instability of the seasons. I hoped a storm wasn't on the way. "Angie." "Chris." Mr. Blakely called, before pulling open the screen door. A tall woman with wavy silver-gray hair shaped into a bob, and a clear, youthful face emerged from the hallway and smiled at us. A tall, painfully thin man with shaggy brown hair waved at us behind her, as he patiently waited for his mother to exit the house. "Mitch, is this the detective?" "Yeah. Detective and assistant. Wilcox and Bainbridge, right?" "Correct," I said, smiling and making eye contact with Angie Blakely. "I'm Angie, and this is Chris, Delaney's brother. It's a pleasure to meet both of you," she said, holding out her hand. "Thank you. I'm sorry that we're meeting under these circumstances. It was bound to happen. Delaney has always been searching for something that doesn't exist," Angie said, rolling her eyes. "Come on back to the patio," Mitch said, leading us down the long hallway to a sitting room that led to the patio. 2 steps paved the way to another screen door that separated the sitting room from the enclosed back patio. A long battered wooden table with 8 chairs sat atop a brown rug, and 4 rocking chairs lined along the wall's edge. "Grab a couple of chairs," Mitch said. "We're going to have some hot chocolate." "That's very kind of you, but don't try to turn us down. We want to treat you to something special while you're here." Martin and I pulled out the heavy chairs, climbed into them, and waited while Mitch and Angie worked together in the kitchen. "This is going to be delicious," Martin whispered to me, as quiet afternoon breezes rattled the Venetian blinds in the windows. I couldn't argue with the sentiment. The sweet scent of chocolate escaped through the screen door, soothing my senses. Mitch and Angie came out with 5 large mugs on a serving tray. The piping hot chocolate was topped with large dollops of whipped cream. The first sip was full of earthy undertones and a hint of cinnamon. It was delicious. "Thank you. This is wonderful," I said, leaning back in the rocking chair. It would be easy to forget why we were there. We make as much as we can right here in house, Mitch said. No preservatives if we can help it. The whipped cream is fresh. Just made it, Angie added. Yep. Organic, as much as we can. We even make our own clothes, Angie said. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. This is excellent, I said before sipping more of the homemade dark chocolate. I'm not as hardcore as they are, but I like their lifestyle. Mom and Dad are hippies. It's really cool. I can't get why Delaney doesn't dig them more, Chris said. Are you and Delaney close? I asked. You know, we're different, but I'd say we are kind of close. We were both gamers before Delaney had the kids and Jeff, but over time she became swamped, and we kind of lost touch a little. When is the last time you spoke to her? Probably about 2 months before she left. She had sent me a text about some dude she said was our cousin out in Utah. Do you remember the name? Yeah, it was kind of an uncommon name, Jebediah. Delaney thought he was something special because he was uber religious and had more info about our ancestors. We know our history, but we aren't beholden to it the way Delaney is, Mitch said. You can have another cup before you go, Angie said. She seemed uncomfortable with the conversation. Thank you. I'm fine for now, I said, turning my attention to Delaney's mother. We've got a chickpea and sweet potato stew brewing as well. You two should have dinner with us before you leave. Thank you so much for the offer, I said, pausing a minute before saying, Mrs. Blakely, what can you tell me about Delaney? Well, we love her. She probably won't tell you that when she's found. But we're different, and she doesn't like that. Angie Blakely's eyes were heavy with regret or guilt, I couldn't tell which. Delaney always wanted us to have rules and tell her what to do, Mitch jumped in, speaking quickly and taking his wife's hand in his. That's not how we operate. Angie and I didn't have kids until we were older, and we never wanted to be dictators. Our house was a bit of a democracy. Delaney hated that. We both grew up in strict households. I had religion, Mitch didn't, but his dad is a no-nonsense kind of guy. So of course, we'd get together and think we're never going to be like that. No religion or strict rules. Angie's dad still hates me, Mitch said, throwing his head back and laughing. Within a week of meeting, we drove all over the country. Partied more than we should have, and didn't get married until we were in our late 30s. We shacked up, smoked a lot of pot, and did whatever we wanted to do. This is why they're my heroes, Chris said quietly. And like Mitch said, we didn't have the kids until late, and we tried to give them what we always wanted, freedom, Angie added. Where was Delaney born? She and Chris were both born in Ann Arbor. We become interested in Beaver Island when we traced our family trees. Some of my ancestors lived here. They came over from England to join the Mormon Church. Initially, they lived in Illinois, but they followed a guy up here. Eventually, they were run out of here. I'd always heard the stories when I was a kid, but my parents never brought us up here. After I told the story to Angie, she said, let's head up there. Visited when we were roaming around and fell in love. Vowed that we'd live here someday. Years later, we thought, why not give these kids something different? Mitch was a welder at the time, which is a skill that travels well. So we moved here. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a job, Mitch said. Instead, we both ended up working in the shops downtown during the summer. We built the house ourselves, so we lived in a trailer for about 2 years. It was quite a transition, but over time it seemed fine. It's probably hard to break into such a small place, I said. True, but we could connect with the other people here that are into the land and living simply. People here are laid back? Is this a place where outsiders are welcome? Not initially, but once they know that you don't want to change the place, they embrace you. How did Delaney end up back in the Ann Arbor area? Well, let's talk about that a bit. As a mother, this is sad to say, but Delaney just wanted to get away from me, and I felt like we should let her go. Chris is easygoing, quiet and shy, and he liked living with us, so there weren't any issues with him. We got tired of fighting with Delaney, so we finally asked her what she wanted. Which is what we normally did. We always asked the kids what they wanted to do, Mitch said. And we had to change things. All of us were miserable. So true. That's why when Delaney turned 15, we let her move downstate with her aunt. During that time she met a boy, and it was one of the first normal teenage things Delaney did. She really liked him, and we were actually delighted that she had a healthy teenage love, Angie said. Jeff was more accommodating to our lifestyle, but Delaney really wanted rules. So when she turned 17 and asked if she could join the Mormon church, we allowed her to be baptized. We felt like it was her choice. She found something that made her happy, so we thought, why not? Did you still see Delaney during the summers after she moved down in Ann Arbor? That's a great question. That was the plan. We would just reverse what had been happening. You know, Delaney and Chris had gone downstate to visit my sister Michelle and her husband every year after we moved here. Chris continued to visit his aunt and uncle during the summers. He told us that Delaney was not herself, and he found it hard to be there. We asked her to come up to Beaver Island and visit us for the summer. We missed her. But Delaney didn't like that idea. I ended up still going downstate to visit my aunt and uncle. That's probably why I ended up having more of a relationship with Delaney than Mom and Dad. Sometimes we'd all go, but that didn't happen often, Chris said. Angie looked at Chris with motherly admiration before saying, Mitch ended up becoming a computer programmer, so he can work from anywhere. We would head downstate with Chris and stay with my sister, but Delaney didn't seem all that thrilled to see us. We'd rather be up here, so when we realized that our daughter didn't want to see us, we just stopped going down. We love her dearly, but she just had such disdain for us. We thought it was fantastic to get away from the big cities, grow our own food, and just hang out and have a good life. But in the process, I feel like we lost our daughter. She loves you guys. She's just different, Chris added. Her aunt, who is Methodist, liked that Delaney was becoming religious. Like I said, my sister Michelle and I grew up in a very religious household. My family was excited to see Delaney pick up the old oppressive torch of organized religion. Those two became closer when that happened, and I guess you can say that my sister really became like her mom. Did that cause friction in the family? No. I was fine with it. Like I said, Delaney never really got along with me. Michelle enjoyed having Delaney in her home, and the whole family was supportive because we just wanted Delaney to be happy. And we were ecstatic with Jeff Whitby, we were ecstatic. He was very nice and polite, and we knew that he was a good influence. We thought it was a cute first relationship, and when he went away on a mission for his church, we thought it was over between them. I mean, 2 kids, 2 years to be together. Surely they would end it and move forward with their lives, right? I didn't think it was far-fetched, but I'd not dated at all when I was a teenager, and I married my first crush. Boy, were we wrong, Mitch chuckled. A 17-year-old girl waited for a boy she dated in high school to return from spending 2 years in a foreign country. Can you believe that? That's pretty serious, I said. Yeah. That's what we thought, but once again she was a good girl, so we didn't pry. If she wanted to hang out at a church, going to all types of things throughout the week, we weren't going to say anything. She even came to visit for a few weeks after she graduated. That was nice. Mitch said. It was her aunt was a little worried because she started obsessing about church, but nothing seemed out of place when she was here. In fact, we had more fun with her than usual. So, your relationship with Delaney got better after she joined the church. Mitch and Angie looked at one another for a moment, before agreeing that Faith had improved Delaney's relationship with them. I guess she started taking the honor thy parents more seriously. That was what changed, but what stayed the same was her idea that we needed more rules. She tried to get us to join the Mormon church with her. How did that play out? Not well. We respect the Mormon heritage of our family, but we aren't into religion. Yes, the faith of our ancestors is one reason we're here, but we aren't our ancestors. We love having a tie to the land, but we also came here because it's beautiful and we have more freedom. We're familiar enough with religion to know it's not for us. Once we made it clear that we wouldn't be joining any church, she got mad and headed back downstate. Conversion or bust? Yep. Delaney didn't want to be close to us unless we would be a part of her church. She basically gave us an ultimatum. It brought home a hard truth. The only reason she had come around was to change us. We went a while without speaking to her. When did you hear from her again? There were a few phone calls here and there, but it was years before we saw her again, and when we did, she was married. Really? No invitation to the wedding? Nope. My only daughter, my girl, didn't let me have that mom moment with her at her wedding. How long was it after the marriage before she contacted you? A few weeks? By that time, Delaney and my sister had fallen out, and she hadn't talked with any other family members. So her being gone is not that alarming because she's fallen out of contact before. That's right. We hope she's okay, and we are concerned, but this is something Delaney's done to us before. That was good to know. What can you tell me about Bethany? She was always bad news, Chris said. She and Delaney are about 5 years apart, so she was out getting into trouble when Delaney moved in with Aunt Michelle. It's really weird that they ended up forming such a bind, because Delaney hated what Bethany did when she was younger. So their closeness was a new thing? Absolutely. We used to talk about how messed up Bethany was. She was into drugs in her early 20s, and she was married and divorced twice before she is 30. I've heard from other family members she was on the verge of a third divorce when she and Delaney left. Sounds like someone who was the opposite of Delaney, Meriton said. It was the first time he'd spoken since we'd begun discussing Delaney. True. We were shocked to hear that they disappeared together. Jeff said they were getting close and would get together every couple of weeks. Chris said, shaking his head in disbelief. I made a mental note to check in with the Utah agency handling Bethany's death investigation. Perhaps the toxicology screen would provide some clues. Had Delaney followed Bethany into the drug scene? What can you tell us about Jeff? He's just as nice as he was as a boy. Jeff is the reason we have contact with our grandkids. He forces her to come up here at least once a year. We end up downstate now and then, and he'll let us come over. Delaney always finds excuses as to why they're too busy when we're in town. What do you know about the relationship between Delaney and Jeff? Well, we found out that they were married and living in Provo after the fact, if that tells you anything. Needless to say, we weren't happy. We thought they were too young. Jeff had been to Brazil on his mission, but Delaney hadn't been anywhere. We didn't take a bunch of trips when the kids were young. We focused on making home the best it could be, so her experiences were limited in that way. But we traveled a lot when we were dating. Both of us took trips with friends and gave one another space to grow. Chris followed in our footsteps, and I guess we'd hoped that Delaney would do something similar, but she didn't go anywhere. Delaney's experiences were limited to Ann Arbor and Beaver Island before she got married? Yep. She hadn't really been anywhere before they moved to Provo. From what I saw, I think that Delaney liked it better than Jeff did. She was mad when they moved back. We supported her because she was delighted with him, and he's a good guy, so we didn't have much of a protest about it. Like I said, we're not into rules, we respect people's lives and don't care how they want to live. She chose a different route, and that's okay. Unfortunately, over time, she began to resent us because she'd taken a course that diverged from ours, Mitch said. Delaney thinks we need to be like her. That caused trouble. Jeff has been great. He's the reason they come up and spend time with us. Jeff doesn't expect us to change the way we live. We can still have our coffee and beer. He's not judgmental, but Delaney thought we were doing something wrong. I know you didn't spend a lot of time with them, but did you notice any problems between the two? I asked. Yes, there were some issues. The main problem is the fact that they had children so rapidly. They didn't have time to spend just as a couple, which is something we really valued. Our time together, even after we had kids, has always been cherished. I tried to talk to her about that. I felt like it was good motherly advice to pass along. Children are great and wonderful, but they change marriages, so if you have them back to back, this could be a problem. She did not want to hear it. So there is some discord between the two. Yes? When is the last time you spoke to Delaney? It's been a while. Maybe since the baby was born. It was months ago. I've had a little contact with her since the baby came. Mitch hasn't had too many conversations with her because she's uptight. I'm sure you can tell how chill he is. It was true. Mitch seemed like a man who had never known a stranger. Initially, Delaney was in contact with Jeff, but now he's unable to reach her. I think she's still in Utah, but we aren't sure. Mitch and Angie looked at one another, their eyes searching for answers. Chris broke the silence. No idea, but if I were a betting man, I'd say this has something to do with the weird cousin she mentioned.